Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. June 14th, 2017. You may not remember what happened that day, but our next guest can tell us about that day and what happened in the Washington area. Congressman Steve Scalise, thank you for being on Connor's Corner. So what happened on June 14th?
Great to be with you. On June 14th, started like any other day. I was going to a baseball practice for a charity baseball game that Republicans have been playing against the Democrats for about 100 years. And we play at the Major League Ballpark, Washington Nationals, and raise about $500,000 for local charities. Well, a gunman showed up that day on the ball field, and he was intent on killing every Republican out there, and started shooting. I was playing second base at the time. I got hit, went down, and, what the book back in the game talks about is all of the events that morning and then in the months following that helped me literally recover from almost losing my life. I nearly died that day from the gunshot wounds, but through a lot of miracles and a lot of heroes that I chronicle, and just wonderful people praying and offering support, I was able to recover, to learn how to walk again, and ultimately to get back to the job I love, serving in Congress. And the book is all about that, all about the journey, starting from that tragic day with the shooting, and then going all through the recovery and all the highs and lows and the roller coaster ride along the way.
When is the first moment that you realized you were in danger?
The first shot that went out, I really didn't think it was a gunshot, because you're not thinking, somebody shooting a gun out on a ball field. I thought it was maybe a tractor backfiring. I thought I saw a John Deere tractor, and then by the time the second shot came, then you figure, okay, somebody's shooting a gun, and I never saw the shooter. And next thing you know, I'm hit, and I went down, and I just started crawling away from the noise of the gunfire, and then I hear a lot more shots. And it was a pretty wild firefight. I knew, as far as I knew, I could have been hit again, and it could be over. And so I just started crawling away, and after about 30 feet, my arms gave out, and then I just laid there, and I could hear a different caliber of gunfire, which meant to me that the Capitol Police security detail that were with me that morning were firing back at the shooter. And you talk about heroes. Both of those Capitol Police officers, David Bailey and Crystal Griner, were shot during the shootout and still kept at it, and never gave up, and ultimately took the shooter down and saved all of our lives.
And I think a lot of people many people have forgotten that.
Yeah, there's a lot about it that probably people don't know. I mean, especially in the few minutes of the shootout itself, just exactly what happened and all the people that came together, including the Alexandria police who showed up on the scene and ultimately helped take the shooter down, and then the people that were there on the ball field and some of their backstories. People who, like Brad Wenstrup, who was a major in the Army, but a medical doctor and a member of Congress from Cincinnati area, who was there that day, and he knew immediately what had happened to me and came to my rescue when the shooter was down and put a tourniquet on to stop the bleeding. And that act alone saved my life, because my trauma surgeon said when I arrived at the hospital I had a 0 blood pressure, and if the tourniquet wasn't applied just properly, I would not have made it to the hospital alive. So many stories like that I detail in the book. True heroes, true miracles, and a lot of good fortune.
All right. So first, in effect, the Capitol Police saved your life. Then Congressman Weintraub, who happens to be a medical doctor. How many members of Congress are medical doctors? I know it's there.
Oh, it's just, you think about those miracles. The fact that Brad was there, and he said typically he leaves a little bit earlier from practice because he has an 8:00 meeting at his office. So he'd have left by 7:00, and the shooting happened about 10 minutes after 7. But for whatever reason, he said something told him to stay and go back to the batting cage. And he was in the batting cage when the gunfire started. And because he was a trauma surgeon in Iraq, he had seen those kind of injuries. And in my case, it was an entry wound with a .762 caliber bullet, very large bullet. But there was no exit wound. And to some people, they just saw a little incision and figured, okay, there's a little bit of blood, but it can't be that bad. Brad knew right away it was really bad, because the bullet broke into hundreds of pieces and literally just started tearing through arteries and veins and organs and doing tremendous damage, and ultimately leading to massive blood loss. And he knew what was going on inside. And so that's why he applied the tourniquet and ultimately allowed me to make it to the hospital alive.
Okay, so next thing, I guess you're on the ambulance, you're on your way to the hospital. What's going through your mind?
Oh my gosh, a lot was going through my mind in those immediate moments. I started praying to, first thought I had was I've got now an 11-year-old daughter, and my first thought was, God, please don't let Madison have to walk up the aisle alone. And it just, was an emotion that overtook me. And then I prayed that I'd, be able to see my wife and kids again. And just, was starting to ask God for some real specific things. And I had a numbness, almost like a calm that took over me once I put it in God's hands. And for all the pain I probably should have felt, really it was more numbness. And then, I heard a lot of people around me. I could see some of the people around me. When they got me onto the gurney initially, it was to put me into an ambulance. And the ambulance was going to take me to George Washington Hospital. And as you can imagine, in rush hour traffic at about 7:30 in the morning, the ambulance would have never made it. And they saw a helicopter coming, and they thought it was for me. So they turned around, and sure enough, the helicopter lands, and it's coming there to pick me up. And they transferred me over. And 4 minutes later, I'm in the emergency room at MedStar Hospital. And, they had a great trauma team that was ready to go. And there was at least 2 moments throughout that day that they said they didn't think I was going to make it. But somehow they performed a lot of miracles themselves and got me through the day and gave me a fighting chance.
It seemed to me when it was first reported, it didn't seem that it was reported that your life was in grave danger. That seemed to come out after.
Yeah, initially they were reporting that I was shot around the hip, which I was, but to a lot of people they just thought, oh, it can't be that bad. It's not like, to your head or to your heart. What they didn't realize is the bullet had, first it had fractured my femur, shattered it, and then went through and broke my hip and pelvis, and then just started going through a lot of arteries and rip it up and doing a lot of internal damage. And that's the part that people didn't see, but it was incredibly severe to the point where, literally I showed up at the hospital with a 0 blood pressure, almost didn't make it. And luckily the marvels of medicine really helped pull me through at the hospital.
You're at the hospital, you have your first surgery, but you're not out of the woods.
Right. I had an initial surgery where they were just trying to find all the places where the blood was leaking out of and try to sew up each vein. And then, they put more blood in me and more would come out, and they'd find that and they'd sew that up. And, that went on for a while. They said I went through about 20 units of blood, and the typical body takes about 8 or 9 units total. So I had a lot of blood going in and out of me during those first few hours. And then I got infections. There were some infections that set in just, when you have your whole stomach opened up while they're performing that kind of surgery, other things get inside there and caused some internal infections that almost killed me the second time. And then luckily I was able to fight that off. So, we talk about all the different surgeries and twists and turns and, and ultimately getting discharged and getting out of the hospital. And, after the process of learning how to walk again. And even that was quite a journey in and of itself.
How did your wife react to this?
Jennifer was initially it was like disbelief. You can imagine getting a phone call and she and the kids were coming up to DC the next day to watch the baseball game. So, she was just thinking, oh, something happened to Steve. And they're like, yeah, he's been shot. And nobody knew how bad it was. And she's kind of numb, like thinking, okay, this mustn't be that bad. Nothing, what bad could happen, at 7:30 in the morning on a baseball field. And, and then later she realized just how serious it was. And she was able to get on a plane and fly up to DC. And she brought the kids and, for the first few days didn't tell them what had happened because she didn't know what was going to happen to me. And, by about the third day, when I finally came out of the coma, she was able to bring the kids in and, that was rough too, just because they're looking at me and I don't know how bad off I am, but I could tell in their face when they saw me, you could see almost like a fear when they looked at me. I had tubes coming out of me. I was a mess. And that's when I knew how bad I was. And, and then they got to come see me every few days and I would get better and they saw me get better and, they could tell I was getting better. And then that gave them a sense of relief. But Jennifer held everything together, the whole family, especially in those first few days when, when she's trying to protect the kids and trying to help me, as they're making big medical decisions that I couldn't make because I was unconscious.
When did you first feel, or when were you in a position where, hey, I'm going to live? Or did your family know, hey, I'm going to live?
Wow. It was probably maybe a week later when I'd been through the worst of the surgeries, and there were a few infections that set in maybe like the 2 to 3 week period after, but at those points you're not thinking like that you're in a life threatening situation, because I was about to get discharged right around July 4th, in fact. So I'd been in for a few weeks and getting better, and they had even started giving me a tentative release date. I think it was going to be like July 5th. And all of a sudden, on the 4th of July, I had this serious infection that almost took me again, and they had to wheel me into an emergency surgery late at night, and luckily were able to cut me open and handle that infection. So it was just one thing after another like that, and then finally after that, I got another release date a few weeks later, and I was actually starting to feel better physically and mentally. And, and once I got discharged to the rehabilitation hospital, then I knew I was at a point where I was just focusing on getting better. And that's when I had to learn how to walk again. And it was excruciating physically, but at least mentally I knew I had made it through the worst parts.
Just going over the story, it seems like divine providence was on your side down the line.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. Just all of the different things that happened, especially in those first few minutes, that if you look at one or two of them in an isolated way, you'd say, okay, that's a coincidence, and that's a coincidence. And after a while, you say, okay, God was definitely playing a hand, and and performing some real miracles that each thing had to fall into place exactly like it did for all of us to live that day. And I know I'm lucky to be alive. I know how close I came to not making it, and how so many other people knew they were also, their lives were in the balance too. And fortunately, God spared us all.
How has your outlook on life changed since the shooting?
My outlook on life really, it more than anything, it focused me on what's most important in life. I love my family, but I think it made it even more important. I think my kids probably, they kind of warm up to their dad, and they're a lot more affectionate to me, and I think they realize how close I was too, and I cherish every one of those moments. And I love my job, and I really wanted to get back to work, and I was able to do that. And and if anything, maybe you just try to remove some of the clutter in your life, some of the things that aren't as important, that all of us do from day to day things, and you just focus on what really matters in life.
Now, speaking of your job, it's going to change in a couple of weeks. What is the future of the Republican Party in the House?
Well, we lost the majority in the elections just a week and a half ago, and it was really, really tough, and unfortunate to see what's happened. But it's one of those things where we knew it was going to be a tough election cycle, because any first midterm of a new president, they lose on average about 30 seats, and with a 23 seat majority, we knew that it was going to be a real uphill battle to keep the House, but we thought we had a real chance, and we had a fighting chance. But we had a lot of things that went against us, not only history, but there was a lot of money that went against us too, and we got heavily outraised. We've got to address that. I think on some of the things that we stand for, we don't do a good enough job of telling people what we stand for, and we've got to get better at that too. But we're looking in the mirror right now at all those things. But I think Nancy Pelosi will likely be Speaker again. She moves usually a very far left agenda, and I don't think that's where the country is. I don't think that's where a lot of those members who got elected and flipped the House. It's going to be, it's going to be a day of reckoning for them to say, okay, they campaigned saying that they were conservative and they wouldn't vote with Nancy Pelosi. Now that they're going to be in the Democrat majority, which side are they going to choose? Are they going to stick with the promises they made in the campaign, or are they going to vote with Nancy Pelosi and that new majority?
Let me ask you this. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of the outside, well, I wouldn't say outsiders, but let's say part of the people who root for the Republicans, for conservatives, why didn't the message get out how good the economy was? Why didn't that seem to have a major impact?
Everywhere I went, in a lot of these swing districts I would go, people really liked the economy and how well it was doing, and they were benefiting from it. But it's almost like anything when whatever the most important crisis is of the day that you've got to deal with, if you put that fire out, you're moving on to the next crisis. We had gotten the economy moving again, and the economy was benefiting workers at every level. I mean, middle and lower income people were benefiting. We were rebuilding our middle class. But it was almost like, okay, they were happy that they got their job back or they got a pay raise. Then they started thinking about other things. And, the Democrats, they did a really good job of raising large amounts of money and getting out a message, whether it was true or not. And a lot of the things they said during the campaign weren't true. But ultimately, you've got to go and combat that as a candidate or, an incumbent. If you're being attacked, you've got to go set the record straight. And I don't think we had the money and the resources to counter what they were doing.
What's in your future, Congressman? What are your future plans?
Well, I'm running for the position of Republican whip, and unfortunately be in the minority, but I have strong support from every segment of our Republican conference, and I appreciate that. And I've got to refocus on what it's going to take to get the House back in 2 years. And, if we're going to be able to keep working with this president to keep building on the economic success we have, that's going to be with the House Republican majority. A lot of the big problems that are still facing us, from fiscal discipline that I think is still critically important, to health care, which is getting worse because so many of the remnants of Obamacare are still making health care too costly. It's unaffordable for so many families, and millions of people lost the good health care they had because of Obamacare. And that's going to continue to be a problem. And, we need to come back to that. We need to secure our border. We need to get back to national security. And, and I want to work with this president to do that in the next few weeks during this lame duck period. And we're not going to stop battling, even in the minority, to fight for those conservative principles.
Thank you, Congressman. The name of the book, Back in the Game, the author, Congressman Steve Scalise. Thank you for what you've done for the country. Good luck to you. We admire your service and how you got over this.
Thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. And